Well, it's Friday the 17th, 2 days after Jeremy Hunt's highly anticipated budget on Wednesday the 15th. And whilst the reaction in Westminster has been largely positive, and now that most of the dust has settled, I'm going to be quickly running through the main points of this budget and analysing it. Well, this steady as she goes budget is ultimately the greatest embodiment of today's so-called Conservative Party I can think of. Both inadequate and, in a traditional small c sense, hardly Conservative at all. It has left Jeremy Hunt with the lowest leeway of any Chancellor post-budget in recent times, standing at £6 billion. Jeremy Hunt has managed to spend 2/3 of the hard-earned headroom that the British people worked so hard for. Starting with a pension reform scheme, which will allow the top 1% to reach their desired threshold for pension and therefore retirement much quicker. Contributions now can be increased to £60,000 at a time. And this also in turn provides a loophole for the controversial inheritance tax scheme, which normally stands at 40%. Those off work sick over 60 have a net worth of just £58,000. Those off work retired over 60 have a net worth of £1.25 million. And this shows the scheme actually targets all the wrong people, and it is really unlikely to get people off the golf course. Perhaps their upcoming hip surgery may be more likely, but this is a strong wish when you look at all the ongoing strikes at the moment. Furthermore, any impact of childcare reforms is unlikely to be felt by any of these golfers. Quite frankly, funding in place already has had an uptake of just 40%. And the limit here to 38 weeks a year is a significant barrier for mothers around the UK. Providers have already come out and said unless government promises and pledges to increase funding to improve capacity, demand will outstrip supply. Moreover, the £6 billion chucked at retaining the 5p cut in fuel duty could have paid 5 million of these public workers that are striking. At a time of decreasing global fuel prices, the retention of these actual cuts has left the Tories open to criticism from Labour. Furthermore, 5p isn't very significant in comparison to much of Europe. 25p cuts have been more versatile and more useful, and were not uncommon in places like Germany. The effective 30% rise in corporation tax has not been covered by the £27 billion that the government is spending on capital allowances. Capital allowances will take just 50% of the hit, and they will come with a low take-up. Even below yearly profits of £250,000, there are marginal tax rates for corporations between 19 and 25%. Small businesses getting taxed between 19 and 25%. When Ireland has rates of just 12.5% across the sea, it's hardly surprising that big businesses like AstraZeneca, are deciding to invest their £300 million plant there as opposed to here. When George Osborne was Chancellor, and he cut corporation tax from 25% down to 19%. Tax receipts as a share of GDP, not just tax receipts as a share of GDP, increased to 2.9%. And this proves that with simple tax schemes and simple coverage costs, corporation tax can be lowered. This fiscal drag has brought 6 million more people into paying tax, which is an effective 4p rise in the rate of income tax. 8 million people, which is now a quarter of the workforce, are paying the 40% rate of tax. And many of these are not highly qualified or senior teachers, and are maybe even police officers or firemen. Furthermore, this is not helped when quality of life will decrease too. The OBR predicts a net migration rate of 245,000 this year. Considering last year, it predicted a net migration rate of 129,000, which, by the way, in reality, it was 500,000. This figure is likely to be a lot higher. And for quality of life per capita, things aren't looking good. Most disappointingly, perhaps, is the rise in alcohol duty, and also the rise in tobacco costs, which is 6% above inflation. Not just 6%, 6% above inflation. Listen, whilst this may sound like a BMA union pay demand, You begin to wonder how much more you can tax it. For every £2 billion spent on smoking related diseases, there are £12 billion in tobacco brought in tax receipts. I mean, how much more can you possibly tax? Well, you never really know when you're seeing the highest tax burden since the Second World War, which equates to the tightest 2-year living standard squeeze in the UK. Well, I mean, most importantly, of course, next election, there'll be huge reliefs in the budget before the election, as the Conservatives attempt to claim sovereignty over what are mostly stolen Labour policies, right? But I propose to you, as Ronald Reagan did not so long ago, ask yourself when you're at the ballot box, are you really better off than you were 4 years ago? And I expect, after a set of stealth taxes worth 120 billion, the answer is likely no.